Hi, this is Pod Save the UK. I'm Coco Khan.
And I'm Nish Kumar. Today, Chancellor Rachel Reeves unveils her much-anticipated Halloween budget, and we'll be finding out if it's the horror show it's predicted to be.
That's right, and as well as being a big deal for the future of the country, it's a big moment in history, as it's Labour's first budget in 14 years and the first delivered by a female chancellor.
To find out what it means for the UK, we'll be joined by the economic and political commentator Grace Blakeley and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's Katie Schmuecker.
And later, I'll be putting the hard questions to Labour MP Torsten Bell.
So, Coco, it's midday
Yes.
on Wednesday the 30th, the day before Halloween. We've sent our producers down to Poundland, which for international audiences, get your mind out of the gutter, especially American audiences. I know how that sounds. It's a discount shop, and we've got at least £3.50 of high-quality Halloween tat.
Yeah, I'm loving it. Someone carved us an actual pumpkin.
Our producer May did this.
Yeah.
We should name...
It was actually producer May's housemate.
Oh, really?
Come on, we've got to give credit where credit is due.
Wow.
Shout out to May's housemate.
May really presented that on our WhatsApp group as something she had done. That's all I'm saying. Wow.
But the pumpkin's got a scary face, which is fantastic. And then on the back, it says PS UK.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, if I were to take this pumpkin home and someone asked me what that meant,
Yeah.
I mean, I could say, oh, shameless self-promotion is my podcast.
Yeah.
Or we could say it's Pumpkin Save the UK. Wouldn't that be really cute?
Okay, welcome to Pumpkin Saves the UK. So we are standing by to listen to Chancellor Rachel Reeves' very first budget, and there's a lot of MPs hoping that this won't come back to haunt them.
We really are doing the Halloween puns, aren't we? So,
Go for it.
Okay. Some questions about the budget. The spooky budget. Are we about to see some ghosts of chancellors past?
There's the ghoulish spectre of
Yep.
austerity raising its head, possibly.
There's going to be horrifying increases to bus fares.
Are vampiric landlords about to be staked?
Don't forget the zombie policies, you know, those ones that should have died, but nobody can seem to get rid of them.
Look, the main thing we can take from all of this is that possibly it's not a great idea to do your budget the day before Halloween. And leave yourself open to newspaper editors and newspaper sub-editors having a very fun morning tomorrow.
Are we stopping? I've still got more.
What are your more?
Well, I was thinking about, pumpkins and having a gourd time.
Having a gourd time.
It's the genre of vegetable that a pumpkin is a gourd. G-O-U-R-D.
Anyway, autumn budgets don't tend to be a big deal for a government midterm, but this is a defining moment for the new government. During the election campaign, Labour was desperate to avoid locking themselves into any financial promises. So this is our chance to actually find out what their fiscal agenda is all about. This is a big deal, right?
Oh, absolutely.
All through the summer, Keir Starmer has basically been making the odd speech saying things are about to get worse, so you'd all better just prepare yourselves for another 5 years of hardship. There hasn't been any very specific policy detail. This is the first chance we're going to get to see of what this Labour government actually looks like.
Absolutely, absolutely. So today's budget will tell us how much tax we'll pay, it will tell us how much the government will spend and borrow, and how exactly the Chancellor is changing the fiscal rules. Labour have repeatedly warned us of tough decisions, but have they stocked up on any sweets for the trick-or-treaters? Let's find out.
To restore stability to our country, to protect working people. More teachers in our schools, more appointments in our NHS, more homes being built, fixing the foundations of our economy, investing in our future, delivering change, rebuilding Britain. We, on these benches, commend those choices, and I commend this statement to the House.
To help us unpick Rachel Reeves' spooky speech, we're joined by Grace Blakeley, economic and political commentator, journalist and author. Welcome back to Pod Save the UK, Grace. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So how are you feeling after Reeves' speech? Spooky? Terrifying? Horrifying?
I mean, I guess it depends where you are. Not particularly spooky for me because I don't have a lot of planned capital gains income or any children in private school, but potentially spooky for some other people.
Major landlord and anti-capitalist author Grace Blakeley joins us now. So let's just get straight into it. There's been so much speculation about tax rises and so much incredible conversations about whether or not landlords constitute working people. It's always a relief to be put out of our misery on the end of this particular thing. So can you spell out what the new taxes are, Grace? Because there's £40 billion of them, which we're already being told is, in cash terms, one of the biggest single tax rises in a single budget.
Yeah, so there are some big tax increases in here. Take it with a pinch of salt, that number, because we just don't know how much each of these tax increases will raise. What economists say is that there are always behavioral effects, which means that when a tax goes up somewhere, people, move income around and try and, pay less tax on it. So that's what we're potentially going to see with the capital gains tax increase. So capital gains is a tax that you pay on the increase in a value of an asset over the course of the time that you own it. So for example, if you have a second home, you have to pay capital gains tax on the increased value of the home after you sell it, and that's going to go up. But we've known about this for a while. So what we've seen is a lot of people selling their second homes, poor people, ahead of this budget, so as to not get caught up in this increase. So that's a relatively big thing. Mm-hmm. We've also got, one of the biggest things here is an increase in employer national insurance contributions. So that's allegedly going to raise 25 billion. So that's kind of a big tax on businesses and kind of all businesses across the spectrum, really, rather than a more focused one on big businesses. There's also a fun little increase in the fuel duty on private jets, which I thought was quite good. They're going ahead with abolishing the non-dom tax regime, which again was announced by the Conservatives before the election. So that's kind of pretty much expected. And we're seeing some windfall taxes increase as well, which is also potentially quite good. Then there's the VAT on private school fees and some other changes to private school taxation. The big shock for a lot of people is that everyone expected her to keep the freezes on the income tax and national insurance thresholds, which basically means the kind of levels at which the tax rates are introduced and start to change. And that's a pretty easy way to raise revenue, because as people's incomes increase, more people get dragged into paying taxes or paying higher taxes. But she's saying that those freezes are going to stop after 2028, which means people will not be as likely to be dragged into upper tax bands. So it's kind of like a mixed picture here. You've got some good stuff in terms of taxing wealth, taxing capital gains. There's also some business taxes, which are maybe going to affect small businesses, but still some focused taxes on big businesses as well. Not everything that I think we would have wanted to see when it comes to, for example, wealth taxation on big businesses and fossil fuel companies in the finance sector, but certainly a step in the right direction.
Just paint a picture for me. When you're saying not everything we could have wanted, what could we have wanted?
Well, a lot of people ahead of this budget have been campaigning for a wealth tax, like a proper wealth tax. We've got a bunch of different, not really joined up taxes on different forms of wealth, of income from wealth and wealth itself. So capital gains tax is kind of like a wealth tax, because it's a tax on the value of the increase in the value of certain assets. But it's not really very expansive, and it's not a full tax on actual asset values. And the argument that people have been making, and this is lots of NGOs, lots of campaigners, is that we need a tax on wealth to fund decarbonisation. This budget has given us not a wealth tax, and it's also basically diverted all of the conversation about decarbonisation to this weird technology called carbon capture and storage, which is basically pretty much untested, and definitely isn't what environmental campaigners were looking for. So in that sense, it's not much.
Right.
So we never have to hear this fucking phrase again. Can we just clarify that Labour has managed to keep its pre-election manifesto promise that working people would not be hit by these changes? Is this a budget that's geared towards raising tax from people who can afford to pay it?
I think that's fair mostly.
Yeah,
I do think that is largely fair, because the pledge was income tax and national insurance, which is the two main taxes they raise by far the most revenue, weren't going to change. And that has been kept. And actually, in removing that freeze on the thresholds, she's giving people even a little bit more wiggle room moving into the future. What I would say is that the biggest thing people are going to notice in terms of their living standards actually has less to do with these tax changes and much more to do with public services. And there are some gaps there that I'm sure we can talk about.
Well, let's talk about them now. What are the gaps?
Basically, what we need to think about here is, for a long time, we've been having this debate about what constitutes investment and what constitutes current spending. Now, lots of economists are basically saying the UK has been, had this nonsensical approach to investment and to spending. It's been cutting off its nose to spite its face by including lots of different forms of investment in what we count as current spending. Now, there's an argument that current spending needs to be covered by current tax revenues. That's not really necessarily true, but it's something that, some people maintain. And it's certainly what Rachel Reeves and the Labour Party have been maintaining with their fiscal credibility rule. But investment doesn't in any way need to be covered by current spending. As long as it's good investment, it will generate greater tax revenues over the long run. So, you think about building a railway that, brings two cities together, increases trade, creates job opportunities, it raises, tax from business rates, it raises economic growth, etc. And Rachel Reeves has been talking a lot about the need to unlock growth. She doesn't really want to increase taxes too much. She doesn't really want to increase public spending too much, even though that's what we need. She's saying instead, let's kind of put all those issues off and just focus on increasing growth. The way she wants to increase growth is by raising investment. So we've got 100 billion, I think she announced, in capital investment, which is going to be distributed across a whole different swathe of projects across the public sector. We've got some transport investment, some investment in house building, alongside this National Wealth Fund that's going to be happening at the same time. So the pledges that we have around public services are mostly to do with capital investment. So think things like, building new hospitals, building new schools, kind of correcting for all of the kind of failures that we've seen in terms of capital spending recently. What is less clear is how all the big challenges around current spending, so like staffing costs, wages, like all these big gaps that we know exist in the NHS, in schools, how that's going to be dealt with. I think it's really important to remember that, okay, this isn't a continuation of austerity. Like, there's no way you can really make that argument.
She said that about 50 times. Like, if it felt, certainly rhetorically, that is the one thing that Rachel Reeves was trying to get across all through the budget.
Yeah, and like, if that wasn't true, I would 100% say it, right? I don't think you can argue that this is a continuation of austerity, but it's definitely not enough to reverse the damage of, like, a really long period of austerity that we've had under successive governments. And that's going to be her big problem, because all these tax changes, fine, if it actually works and people actually pay them, maybe they'll reduce inequality a bit. But the thing people are going to notice is my wage going up? What's happening with regards to employment and inflation, and what's happening with regards to public services? The public services picture looks quite mixed. We don't know whether or not all this capital spending is going to solve the fundamental problems with things like the NHS. And then there were those growth forecasts, which we got from the OBR, which also didn't look amazing.
Rachel Reeves is changing the OBR borrowing rules to change the way that debt is calculated. And hopefully that would allow for more room for investment in public services. How radical is that as a move? And does that free up?
So this, again, comes back to that thing I was talking about a second ago, which is this debate that's been going on about current spending versus investment. People have to be really clear in their heads about this divide and what it means. It's the difference between, like, building a new hospital, which counts as investment because you're creating a kind of physical asset that you can write, this is worth X amount, and put that in a book somewhere, and that adds to the government's wealth, versus hiring a load of new nurses, which is seen as just current spending, and it makes it a bit easier to finance investment. And that is clearly what we're seeing coming out now, is Reeves making this big push for investment across the board. But it does bring out this other issue, which is like, what really counts as investment? Because if, like, building a bridge or a school or a hospital counts as investment, then why does paying the people who are going to work in those schools and hospitals not count as investment? Because ultimately you can build as many hospitals as you like, but unless there is a motivated workforce that is staffing those buildings, then they're just buildings.
So in terms of the changes, when I was listening to you speak there and you talked about the government's assets, my first thought was, I thought we didn't have many left. We sold them all off, didn't we? Do you think that these changes to the rules could actually expedite the renationalisation projects, maybe taking water companies into public ownership, so on and so forth?
It would be nice, wouldn't it, if that was what this was going to be used for. So, when you, like, sell off a bunch of stuff to private investors and then say, we're going to buy it back, it's basically just like you've given a ton of money to people who had bought this off you and then sold it back to you. And again, this I think is an important point when we're talking about this kind of investment driven project that Reeves has. A lot of this investment is going to be done via the private sector. Now, we know historically that when investment like building schools and hospitals is done by the private sector, it costs more, it often takes longer, and sometimes they build schools that literally collapse or, have other big problems associated with them. So a lot of that investment money is going to be skimmed off the top and go to private corporations that are doing this investment on their behalf. That's certainly true when it comes to housing, for example. So Labour's going to be doing a lot of investment in housing, but it's relying on private developers, which not only means that a lot of that money gets skimmed off the top, it also means that those developers have the incentive to kind of drip feed that housing onto the market very slowly so that it doesn't affect prices. So that's, again, a limiting factor here. I don't want to be overly negative about this budget because it is a change, but I also don't want to be sat here saying this is transformational. It's going to reverse austerity and change people's lives, because that's not true either. It puts in place maybe the foundations for some sustainable, long-term growth if we see more growth globally, which is a big question. And if it's accompanied by much more serious thinking about what they're going to do on climate.
And obviously much has been made about the changes to national insurance and employer contributions. Would it be fair to say that this is a budget for smaller business rather than big business, or is that too far?
I wouldn't say that, because there's a business rate discount that's coming to an end. So lots of businesses are going to see their business rates go up. There's also obviously the employer national insurance contributions, which is a big bill for a lot of medium-sized businesses as well. But we didn't hear much about, corporation tax, and particularly when we're talking about corporation taxes that affect mainly kind of bigger, more profitable businesses, measures to actually make these businesses pay their taxes. Because this has been a problem for a really long time of big multinational corporations moving money all around the world, moving money to kind of low tax jurisdictions, or just saying they're located out of low tax jurisdictions and then using that not to pay any tax. Another thing that was interesting was there was a lot of talk from Rachel Reeves about basically making private equity companies pay more tax. They're able to benefit from these big tax breaks on what's called carried interest. And we know that there was a big push from the city and from private equity firms, which are a big presence in the city, to say don't go for the extreme of kind of, removing these tax loopholes altogether. And that's worked. So they haven't gone for the most extreme version of removing those loopholes altogether.
There's one brief positive we should add to this conversation, which is increase in the minimum wage, which I think is something that has been badly needed in this country.
100%, yeah. And it's a good thing. It was a higher increase than what was recommended by the Living Wage Foundation, I think. So yeah, that's definitely a good thing for people on low incomes.
And 18 to 20-year-olds not getting reduced rates as well.
Yeah.
So that, again, is going to directly impact young people who are on minimum wage.
So, Grace, give us your final review of Rachel Reeves' first budget. How did she do? How many pumpkins out of 5?
Oh, how many pumpkins out of 5? I would give her 3 pumpkins. Out of 5.
Okay.
We haven't fully covered what the conversion rate is, because does the pumpkins mean that it was really scary, or is the pumpkins a positive thing?
I would say it's positive.
Okay.
Pumpkins save the UK. We discussed this at the beginning.
I'm thinking that more pumpkins are better than less pumpkins.
Right,
more pumpkins are good.
Yeah, exactly.
So 3 out of 5.
3, because it could have been a lot less generous. It could have been a lot more generous.
Yeah.
It could have gone further in terms of tackling inequality and raising taxes on the rich. And it could definitely have gone further in terms of reversing the impact of austerity. It definitely could have gone further on climate.
Yeah.
But I'm giving the 3 out of 5 on the basis of what we were all expecting from this particular government. And on that basis, I think it's about middle of the range in terms of what we could have expected from them. Hopefully we'll be able to put a bit of pressure on them going forward to do some more things, particularly on, for example, climate and public services. But overall, it's a fine start.
Grace Blakeley, thank you so much for joining us on Pod Save the UK and for participating in our pumpkin-based rating system for the budget.
Thanks,
The first time might be the last. Thanks, Grace.
Thanks, bye.
Now, after the break, we'll be speaking to Katie Schmuecker from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation to talk about what Rachel Reeves really needs to do after this budget to tackle poverty in the UK.
So much of the media coverage has been about the wordplay around new taxes on working people. And the focus has been on the upper end of the tax bracket. But what does it all mean for people struggling to make ends meet?
Joining us now to discuss what's in this budget for those most in need is Katie Schmuecker, Principal Policy Advisor at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, a charity aimed at solving poverty in the UK. Hi, Katie. Welcome
Hello.
to Pod Save the UK.
Thanks very much.
We should start by saying there was a shout out for the JRF in the budget.
There was.
Were you aware that was going to happen?
We were not aware that was going to happen. But I have to say that is several budgets in a row where JRF has now had a shout out from the government of the day.
Are you keeping a big tally of them in the office?
The budget, when it doesn't happen, we will know that we have failed. It feels like a very high bar to maintain now.
Maybe the budget where it doesn't happen means you've won.
I love that. Yes,
let's
I'm
be
going with
positive.
that.
How are you feeling, sort of gut feelings? We all watched the budget together. What's your gut feelings in the kind of immediate aftermath of watching that speech about what it means for the people that you're working with most?
Well, I mean, every budget is a statement of a government's political priorities. And the Chancellor, early on in her speech, talked about people need to be able to feel change. And we would absolutely wholeheartedly agree with that. And we would argue that the people who most needed to feel change were those who are experiencing hardship right now and those who are at risk of it. You know, we've entering into another winter of cost of living crisis. In the first half of this year, we know from work that we do that there were 7 million low-income households going without essentials. Like, what the budget did for those people is, for us, the sort of test that had to be passed. And there are good things in there.
So let's start with the positives.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's start with the
Because we
positives.
get accused mainly by my friend for being always leading with the negative. So let's start with a positive.
Okay, well, I'm happy to be able to do that because there are some things to be positive about. So the thing that we got a shout out for was a change to deductions policy. This is part of universal credit, where some people's universal credit payments are brought lower by the fact that they are repaying debts of some sort. Often these are debts that have been built up by taking an advance payment whilst waiting for their first universal credit payment, which takes 5 weeks to be made. So that debt gets built up and then clawed back from the basic rate of benefits. Now, the basic rate of benefits, for those who don't know, £91 per week for a single person. That rate is brought lower still by debt deductions. That really drives hardship for millions of families. And so what the Chancellor did is she reduced the maximum deduction from 25% to 15%. That's a good thing. We're pleased to see that. We would have liked her to have gone further and created a legal minimum in the system so that no sort of reduction can bring people's payments down. So think about something like the benefit cap. That also can lead to some people living on very low levels of income. So we would have liked her to have gone further, but certainly the deductions policy is a good change. But we also heard really positive things about the national living wage rate, about social house building, a change to carers allowance and how much carers can work before their benefits begin to be removed. So I think there are things there that are positive, but there are also a couple of skeletons in the closet.
Okay.
On theme for Halloween.
Yeah, on theme for Halloween. So let's talk about those then. What were the skeletons?
The two things that we are concerned about are people who have ill health and disabilities and private renters on low incomes. So taking each of those in turn. The Chancellor confirmed that the government will not go ahead with the work capability assessment reforms that the previous government announced. So that's reforms to the benefits for people who are deemed by the system to be not expected to work due to their health condition or because they're disabled. She confirmed that they will still make a £3 billion saving over a number of years, but that they will do it in a different way, but has not specified yet what that different way is.
Right.
So that leaves hanging over people a very substantial cut to benefits potentially for people who are sick and disabled. Now, we don't know what that looks like. The government has certainly talked about wanting to support people to move into employment. That would be a really positive way of bringing down the benefits bill, because if you're working, then you're paying out less in benefits. But achieving that level of savings over such a short period of time, we are very unclear quite what that's going to look like. And I think the question we would ask the government is, how are they going to do that without driving up hardship for disabled people? Because if you look at the work that we do, disabled people are one of the groups who are most likely to be experiencing hardship. Half of all households in poverty have got a disabled family member. 2/3 of the people who experienced destitution in the UK are disabled or have a long-term health condition. So if you are disabled, if you are unwell, you are much more likely to be experiencing hardship. How is the government going to deliver that level of savings without further driving up that hardship?
So that's something we need much more detail and very quickly, presumably. Talk to me about private renters. What's the concern there?
That one is, in a way, simpler in the sense that the previous government froze something called local housing allowance. That is housing benefit that goes to private renters. It covers the bottom 30% of rents in a market. The previous government froze that for the foreseeable. This government has not changed that. So that means as we head into next year, the amount of support that people get for their private rents is now dislocated from the reality of rents in their local area. We're arguing in the run-up to the budget that local housing allowance needs to be permanently linked to local rents so that people can be sure that they can keep a roof over their head. You know, we have a huge problem with homelessness in this country. You know, over 100,000 children living in temporary accommodation. People not being able to afford their rent is a really key part of that. The government's done some good things on announcing money for social house building. They've done some good things with the Renters' Rights Bill that is going through Parliament. But there are still loopholes in that bill. And now we see that people, again, will see their support for their housing payments dislocated from the realities of what it costs them to pay for their rent. And that just means, again, further hardship as people have to juggle their budgets to try to cover the rent, to keep a roof over their heads, whilst also trying to put food on the table and keep their homes warm this winter.
That problem of keeping things the same, but fundamentally society's getting more expensive and the climate is getting worse, that amounts to a real terms cut. Has there been other examples of that?
Well, I mean, we certainly see that we're still not yet caught up in terms of the value, the real terms value of benefits. So the government confirmed that it will uprate benefits by 1.7%. That is the inflation rate from September, which is the standard way of doing that. However, in the budget today, it was confirmed that average inflation for this year is going to be 2.5%. So benefits a little bit behind the average rate of inflation for this year. But I think you have to think about the context that comes on top of, which is several years where the cost of essentials like energy and food, the things that you can't not have really driven high inflation, have really skyrocketed. That has hit low-income families the hardest. And, you know, that is why we see long queues at food banks. It's why we hear stories about people living on one meal a day so that their kids can eat better. These are the things that we hear from people all the time in the work that we do. You know, recently we're talking to a group of people with experience of poverty who were telling us that they've cancelled Christmas this year again because they just simply cannot afford it. And so there is still this kind of gulf for people, even though the overall inflation is better and some things are improving. Hardship is still being very much experienced now. And people can't just be told to wait for growth tomorrow for things to improve.
As somebody who can't drive and has spent most of their life on trains and buses, I'm always interested to hear what public transport announcements they have made. There's some positive sounding announcements in terms of trains in the north of England, particularly around sort of York and Huddersfield and Manchester, which is very useful. As anyone who's tried to travel across the country knows, it is essentially the sort of quest to dump the ring in Mount Doom. Like it's very
As someone
difficult.
who lives near Huddersfield, I feel that pain on a very personal level.
So that's positive, but the ditching of the £2 cap on bus fares, which is going to rise to £3 at the end of this year, which was implemented by the last government but has not been reversed. Rachel Reeves announced it won't be reversed in the budget. That's gone down particularly badly with a lot of groups, especially if you travel to and from work by bus every day. It's an extra £10 a week or £520 a year. Given that there was also an announcement of a freeze in fuel duty, feels like from a climate perspective, that's not necessarily where you want to be encouraging people but also from a kind of perspective of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, is that another example of working people paying a price that they shouldn't be paying?
Buses are the mode of transport that are used most by low-income people. So, that is a big increase from £2 to £3 as a sort of proportion. That's huge. People will feel that in their day-to-day budgets. If you are struggling to heat your home this winter, if you're struggling to put food on the table already, having to find an extra tenner a week just to get to and from work, and that's before you've even done anything else in your life, like go to the supermarket or anything like that, that all adds to the pressure that households are feeling this winter. Or actually not this winter, it'll be coming in from April.
Yeah.
Okay, Katie, well, give us your review, your final overview of Rachel Reeve's very first budget. We have introduced a new measure. It's called pumpkins out of 5. Pumpkins are good. So just for clarity, more pumpkins are good.
Yeah.
So, what do you think? Out of 5? Marks out of 5?
I think I would give it a 3 out of 5.
Okay, interesting.
So there are some measures where we really needed to see progress, like social house building, like some relief for people who are subject to deductions in universal credit, the extension of the household support fund, also very welcome. But those two kind of looming cuts, one for private renters and one for people who are in ill health or disabled, are really concerning.
Katie, thank you so much for joining us on Pod Save the UK.
Thanks for having me.
Now, after the break, I'll be putting some of the criticisms of the government's first budget to Labour MP Torsten Bell to find out where he thinks the pitfalls and the positives really are. Keir Starmer's pledge to embrace the harsh light of fiscal reality in the budget isn't exactly filling me with joy, but he also promised that good times are ahead. So where exactly are these glimmers of hope and optimism to be found? Joining us now is Torsten Bell, Labour MP for Swansea West and former head of the economic think tank, the Resolution Foundation. Torsten, welcome back to Pod Save the UK.
It's always lovely to join you.
Are you tired?
Thank you for the sympathy. I'm hoping that wasn't faux sympathy. Yes, I've definitely had more relaxing days. We did start quite early this morning, but it's been 14 years since I was involved in the last Labour government's last budget, so it's nice to have a Labour budget for a change.
Well, no, it's definitely a big day. I mean, and for you in your pre-politics life, as we were saying, you're the ex-director of the Resolution Foundation. Normally, you would be making statements. Do you think the budget puts the UK onto a good track on fixing some of those fundamental issues?
Well, the boring thing is I'm a Labour MP, so obviously I think that. But more usefully for you, I think it's a big budget. It's the first budget of a new government. Those are always big because they set the direction of travel for the whole Parliament. And it is that, but it's that in a very big way because the Chancellor's making some really big choices. She's saying, we have to make sure that not just our public finances, but also our public services are sustainable. And that does mean we have to make some tough choices on tax in particular to make sure that we're not going to have our NHS collapsing. We're not going to have robbers just going completely unpunished, and we can't have prisons that are overflowing. So there are some tough choices on tax. And then a second big choice, which is if we're going to grow this economy, we're going to have to invest in it. And so we're going to do that.
So Rachel Reeves has said growth is one of the key missions, but growth is a very slippery beast. It relies on, particularly in a global economy, it relies on many factors. There could be war, there could be crop shortages, there could be all sorts of things. Do you think that
you're really perking us up today, Coco? I thought this is meant to be a fun chat compared to the other interviews. So I'm hoping both of those things get avoided. Although obviously they're not being avoided around the world at the moment. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Do you feel confident that these growth targets can be met, given all the instability of the world that we face?
What I would say is, what is our job as a government? Well, it's to make sure that we get right the things that we can control. And before today, government investment was planned to fall by a third, to be cut by a third over the next few years, at a time when we need to be investing to handle the net zero transition, to invest in our transport and our housing, to make sure we grow the economy. And by the end of today, that is no longer the case because of big choices we've made to say we're not going to have public investment falling in the years ahead. We're going to be supporting the private sector by making sure the public sector is doing its bit and investing. So that is a big change. And yes, I think we're doing our bit to make sure we do grow this economy. It doesn't mean everything's easy. It doesn't mean that we're not affected by the rest of the world. And I know you said at the beginning, talk about growth, it can sound really abstract. The lack of growth is why wages haven't risen, significantly. In Swansea, they haven't risen at all since 2010. And that is not what success looks like. So we do have to invest. That is how we get our economy growing, and that's what the budget does.
So earlier in the show, we were speaking to economist and author Grace Blakeley. We're also talking to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's Katie Schmuecker, and they were overall positive. We've only just designed it today, but it's our new rating system, and it's out of 5 pumpkins. I know.
I see what you did there. That's really, really subtle.
Thank you. Everyone had a gourd time. Anyway, they did nonetheless have some criticisms. So Grace was disappointed that the government chose not to implement a wealth tax targeting people with assets over £10 million. Presumably that could have gone away to offsetting some of the less positive pieces of news. For example, like the cap on the bus fares. I mean, what do you think about a wealth tax? Is that something that Labour could be interested in having a conversation about?
Well, I think if you look at what got announced today, then it's a significant improvement in how we do tax wealth. We do have wealth taxes. We have capital gains tax, we have inheritance tax, and we have others. And on both of those first two, we have set out significant reforms today to make them better wealth taxes. My personal view is that the priority is to make sure you've got better wealth taxes of the ones you've got, because those are the ones that will actually deliver us money. And they are doing a very bad job in lots of ways at the moment. And there's been big changes today. Higher capital gains, removing some of the rates, particularly on the likes of shares, changing some of the reliefs in the capital gains system, and also on inheritance tax, making sure the system's fairer and treats different kinds of estates more similarly than it does today. Those are all very important, big, good changes that will make the country a fairer place, but they'll also raise revenue, because we're not raising taxes for fun. We're raising taxes because our public services are crumbling, and that's what we need to do.
And I just also want to put to you some criticism from the JRF. So Katie Schmuecker was concerned about how the budget will bring down the benefits bill without increasing hardship for disabled people. Now, I do appreciate that what's going to happen with benefits has not been laid out today, and it's still a work in progress. But just is this not an impossible situation, cutting the welfare bill and also providing good standards for the most vulnerable? I mean, how do those two things even work together?
Well, the major change on the benefit system today is steps to tackle fraud, which are mainly from gangs. I think people, when they talk about fraud, they think about benefit fraud in terms of kind of one individual behaving badly. But the big fraud problems are about gangs trying to access what is now a highly digital system. So we are stepping in to make sure we have better access to bank account data, to make sure that we can crack down on benefit fraud. That's the right thing to be doing, and that will save quite significant sums of money. There aren't other reductions in benefit spending that are new in this budget. There is a debate, which I think is probably what you're referring to, about what do we do about the fact that the disability and ill health benefits bill has been rising very significantly. Remember, under the Tories, it was forecast to rise 50% by 2028. So a very significant increase in spending. None of us want to see that, not because from the Treasury's perspective, just it costs lots of money, but because what's sitting behind that is lots of people who are, one, ill, too many people in Britain are sick and ill, but secondly, a benefit system which is saying to those people, show us you're too sick to work rather than us helping you. And that isn't, we're not in a good place on that. And what the Department for Work and Pensions, what Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State, has said is we're going to be looking at that and bringing forward reform. It's not about just saying here on day one is a kind of cuts package. It's what are we going to do to make the system work better? Yes, for the government, but more importantly for those who are sick and disabled. Can I
just add, this is just a personal fear of mine. I keep hearing about the, inclusion of AI in some decision-making, DWP, but in other areas. Obviously, we've just had the post office scandal. Is no one checking this? This feels a bit scary to me, the use of AI, this new technology that we've had. There's so many concerns about it, racial biases, things like that. I mean, is this something that's definitely in motion? Can I stop it now, please? Can I put the brakes on this?
I'll pass the memo on to make it all stop. Look, I don't think you're going to stop the use of AI in different parts of public services, but what does matter is that it's used well, and people are very aware of, like, all MPs have read the same stories you're talking about in terms of how if done in the wrong way, you can reinforce biases that already exist in the world through the use of AI. People in government who are prepping for that are very aware of those dangers. Partly that's obviously make sure you don't do that, but it's also just more generally, we think before you jump. But overall, I wouldn't say the danger is, I'm not seeing across the public sector in swathes lots of people rolling out widespread use of AI when it comes to actual decision taking, because that's where most of the worries come from, as you're rightly pointing out anything. But anyway, I'm going to pass on your message.
Please pass on the message. Just let them know. Listen, AI sounds cool, but machines aren't always right.
Machines are not always right.
Write it down. I can send you a copy of The Terminator.
Thanks.
Now, finally, this afternoon, the financial markets have been it's been a bit of a ride on the back of the budget. I'm not going to ask you to do a pumpkin rating, don't worry. But do you think you'll sleep well this Halloween, or are you worried about any market monsters?
Oh my God. Right, I'm going to forgive you for that terrible line. Look, that's actually a really easy one for me because I'm going to have the best night's sleep I have had after a budget in years. That's partly because the budget's really good, but mainly because in my last job, I used to have to stay up till 3 or 4 in the morning writing a report, analysing the budget, and that's no longer my job. So all my thoughts and prayers are with everyone at the Resolution Foundation who will be staying up overnight doing that. What I'm going to be doing, Coco, is sleeping and trying to forget your terrible, terrible jokes.
Oh, thank you. They'll haunt you in your dreams, my terrible jokes. Well, I hope you do get some rest. And thank you for talking to us, Torsten.
Thank you for having me.
So we've really gotten into the nitty-gritty of the government's first budget, but zooming out for a minute, what does it all add up to? Do we think this is a sort of manifesto-breaking budget driven by balancing the books, or is it one where the Labour Party has seized control and prioritised public services? Or do we think, based on what Katie and Grace said, it's actually something that slightly falls in the middle of those two things?
I mean, having listened to Katie and Grace, it seems to me that is definitely the case. It's hard for me to know exactly what the criteria should be for a budget. Should it be stability? Should it be growth? Where should it be? I mean, John McDonnell wrote in The Guardian that there are two purposes of a budget. The questions that the Chancellor should be guided by is, what society do you want to create, and what economic measures will aid that creation? So looking at what Reeves laid out, what society does she want to create? I'm not convinced it's one that's like much more equal, where there's a complete absence of poverty, but it's more that it's less extreme. That's how it felt anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, there was a constant stress that this was not a return to austerity and that they would be meeting their manifesto commitment of not raising taxes on working people, which I think they certainly can make the case that they have done. I think, as with a lot of the things that we've seen so far, it is essentially, everything has been an exercise in expectation management. And actually, probably the expectation management has actually been pretty good going into this budget, because I think there was a sense that this might be a sort of redraft of austerity. And certainly Grace was very keen to stress that she didn't feel that it was that. And she doesn't strike me as the sort of person that would have held back if she felt that. If she felt that was a perspective that needed being said. I will say that I think probably this is Rachel Reeves' one shot at blaming everything on the Conservative Party. I think that the Labour government has made a sort of lot of hay about inheriting an absolute mess. I think this is the one window where they can really lean on that. I think from next year onwards, people are going to expect some sort of delivery. People are going to expect to feel the benefits that Rachel Reeves is promising them will come through. And that test is one that sort of remains to be seen whether this budget can pass.
So obviously you gave a very complex answer that had lots of nuance in it, but let's just reduce all of that to pumpkins. How many pumpkins are you going to give Rachel Reeves's first budget speech?
Well, listen, we've talked to some experts. I see no reason to deviate from that view.
Yeah.
I will say simply 3 pumpkins out of 5.
Yeah.
What are you going to go with?
I will also go with 3 pumpkins out of 5. So that is our official analysis. 3
I will
pumpkins
say
out of 5.
you'll be seeing and hearing, I imagine, a lot of budget coverage. I challenge any of the other so-called professional news outlets to rate the budget on a pumpkin scale.
Yeah, exactly.
Where are you, Sky News? Where are you, BBC News? Where are you? Actually, GB News might be doing something like this.
So looking ahead to next week's show, there is some very large news coming from America that will affect us all internationally.
It does feel weird to be talking about anything else, given the potential meteor that is heading for all of us next week.
Yeah, it's the American election next week.
Yeah. Fucking hell. I just, I don't know. It's very stressful. Who knows what the fuck is going to happen? But Crooked Media is going all in with daily coverage of every race, every count, and every legal curveball.
Yeah, you should definitely check out their daily pod. It's called What a Day. It'll be fresh in your feeds daily with Jane Coaston breaking down what you need to know in 20 minutes.
Pod Save America will release new episodes with in-depth analysis of the latest news every morning until the race is called.
And if former US President Donald Trump's campaign decides to push the boundaries with their legal challenges, Crooked's go-to legal experts from Strict Scrutiny will stop by some shows across the network to unpack the breaking news, plus drop bonus episodes on their feed for those who want more.
You can find all of this on your favourite podcast platform and YouTube.
Well, I mean, given the severity of that, it sort of sounds strange to mention what will be the big news here, which is the Tory leadership race, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Real shame they couldn't time that for Halloween, because that is an absolute parade of monsters. That leadership contest has been an absolute parade of werewolves and zombies and vampires. Will it be Robert Jenrick or Kemi Badenoch? Will it be Salmonella or E. coli?
Tune in next week to find out. Anyway, thanks for listening to Pod Save the UK. We want to hear your thoughts. Email us at psuk@reducelistening.co.uk.
Don't forget to follow @Pod Save the UK on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter. And if you want more of us, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Pod Save the UK is a reduced listening production for Crooked Media.
Thanks to senior producer James Tyndale and assistant producer May Robson.
Our theme music is by Vasilis Fotopoulos.
Thanks to our engineer Ryan McBeath. The head of production is Dan Jackson.
The executive producers are Anushka Sharma and Madeline Herringer, with additional support from Ari Schwartz.
And remember to hit subscribe for new shows on Thursdays on Amazon, Spotify or Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.